Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Bulk Gun. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be the first part in a small series of how I do freehand and things like that. So it's going to be a short tutorial basically following straight lines and circles and how I get them onto the model and the reasoning behind how I do what I do. Now what I'm hoping for this is that it makes freehanding look a lot less scary because it's very simple in theory, and if you can just practice a few little things it makes it a lot easier when you put it into practice. So what prompted this was on one of the videos where I was doing a freehand of some sort, and I said just draw a circle, and I think it was Necro that said just draw a circle, like it's dead easy. So this is just me showing you how I get about doing the circles. So you see, if I draw one just freehand like that, you've got the first quarter is okay, and then this bottom part here, like the remaining 3/4, is a bit wonky, and that's because it is very difficult, I think, to draw a circle just as it's like this. So if you take your time and do it slowly, it's still probably going to turn out a little bit wonky too. This is me trying to draw a circle slowly. So again, you've maybe got half it that looks okay, not too bad, and then you've got certain points on it where it bulges out, and it really shouldn't because it's not a circle. So when I'm freehanding and when I draw, the main thing that I do is I draw it in quarters. So you go around, you do the first quarter and you do the second quarter. If you're left-handed, it may be a lot easier doing it the opposite way, so you might be doing the top right quarter. I'm not too sure on that, but I find drawing the top left of a circle a lot easier than drawing any other part of it because your hand naturally turns that way, whereas the rest of it is a bit of an awkward angle and you're sort of going into yourself to do like the bottom right and away from yourself to do the top right. The reason a little bit of rhino is here is just because I will be using this to paint a little Slaanesh symbol a little bit later. But you can see this end circle, the quarters all look pretty even. That's pretty good to go. So the reason I'm doing this, it does look really, really basic, but the way when I'm freehanding things and it looks like it's just being painted on, it's always drawn on roughly with a pencil first. So here I'm going to use a Citadel medium layer brush. Where you can see that circle, I'm just going to go round, and it's exactly the same when I'm painting a circle as it is when I'm drawing it. I like to do it in quarters. Now you see, if when I try and draw the whole thing in one go, or when I paint the whole thing here, if you try and do more than the quarter, or if I do, it will make the brush go sideways, so that tip will splay a little bit. So you always want to be going around and doing it like this. So with freehanding and stuff like that, I always do a little very faint pencil line. That just gives you the ability to see where you're drawing it. And then if you have to make any adjustments when you're painting it, that's fine. But it just gives you that rough basic shape that you can work to. So you can see that slightly thicker bit at the top of the circle there where the brush splayed when I was going round and trying to do too much. But that's using a Citadel medium layer brush, so it's not the thinnest of brushes, but you can see that you've got that circle. So that is the basis for how I do all the circles when I'm painting them on. Draw it in quarters, then paint it in quarters or eighths, depending on how you feel with it. So straight lines next. You draw a straight line side to side, it's usually fairly reasonable. I always find if you draw a straight line down, you have to find the exact angle you want to do it. It's pretty decent too. So this one's got a slight kink at the start there, and it goes straight, whereas the top one has got lots of little lumps and bumps in it. Can't see that too well, but it is a little bit more lumpy and bumpy than the end of that bottom one. That's why I always say when you're drawing a straight line, you want to drag the paint away from the tip of the brush. So find whichever way is good for you to paint, going straight down, and if you drag that tip away like so, even with a medium layer brush, you can get a really, really fine line going straight down. If you do it side to side, the line's a lot thicker because it spreads out the bristles on the brush, and it does end up doing your brush a bit of injury so that it won't work as well afterwards. You can, if you're really careful, try and do it that way, but you will end up with a little kink or a curve in the line if you paint it that way, like side to side, generally because your hand is easier to go straight down. You can keep your hand still and steady, whereas if you're going side to side, you've got that wrist joint, you've got your fingers which will move and the brush which will drag. So this is using my Army Painter Wargamer character brush. If can just get that straight line on the go properly. This is one of the things as well when you're freehanding, is just making sure that the paint on the brush is wet enough to use, not too dry. That's why sometimes if I'm freehanding I will add a little bit of extra water to it. So you can see there's not too much difference between a brand new medium layer brush and a new Wargame character brush, but I do find that the character brush is a lot better for holding its point when I'm doing freehand. So we've done the circle, we've done straight lines. Now what can we do with a circle and straight lines? I was trying to think of what would be a good one to use, and then I thought about the Slaanesh symbol, because the Slaanesh symbol is a circle. It's got a kind of line or a bar going diagonally upright with a crescent on top. It's also got a crescent halfway down the line too. So you think, we're doing circles and straight lines. What is a crescent but part of a circle? So I thought it'd be quite a good way to do this. So I'm drawing it just a rough freehand here. It's always worth practicing what you're going to be drawing onto a model before you paint it on. So I'm watching an actual symbol on Google here because I've searched for Slaanesh symbols. I've looked at a few different ones and I'm just drawing a rough sketch. And the reason I always draw it rough first is because when you start just throwing it around and you sort of go, right, okay, I'll draw it quickly like that, you will end up with, as you could see on that one, the bar is too thin, the pieces of the crescent halfway up were too long, and then the actual circles weren't quite in proportion with each other. So if you draw it a couple of times and work out what looks best. So you've got that big circle there. I'm just doing a rough one here. I'm not doing the quarters. We're doing a slightly different crescent part way up. You've got a wider line going up, and then you're putting this circle at the top with this piece coming out of it. So this bit at the top here is a crescent with the opening pointing upright. Using the world's worst rubber on the end of the pencil there, that is getting binned off. And all the lead's falling out, but that's not too much of a bother. So the bit at the top is a circle with a piece cut out of it, and the piece that's cut out of it is a smaller circle, like that. So all this symbol is circles, parts of circles, and a couple of straight lines. When you're drawing it again, you just want to work on getting the sides equal. So this is just a rough one. It's actually really, really big. So if you were painting that on a model, you'd have to paint that on, I don't know, the side of a tank or something like that. But we're just going to paint a really small one just here. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw on a little tiny Slaanesh symbol, roughly here. And yeah, it is a Slaanesh symbol going on a tank, which is the colours of the Death Guard. But this is the easiest thing that I had to hand to paint this on. And we are now just going to start painting that on. So with a tiny little bit of black paint and the Army Painter Wargamer character brush, we're going to paint that straight line. You can see here that I'm holding the bit of a rhino so that I'm painting that straight line down. And I'm just dragging the brush until I get that nice and straight. Dragging it away from the point. Now I'm going to start painting on the crescents, and again I'm turning the piece of the rhino round as you would do with a miniature when you're freehanding it, just so that you're always dragging the brush downwards. Now just for reference, this is the first time that I've painted a Slaanesh symbol. So now we are just doing the circle, and you can see there where the brush went sideways that it widened the line quite significantly. Now we are going to be painting and filling in this circle. Sadly we can't just use the paint can symbol to fill that in. But I am just filling that in slightly off screen there, which is a bit annoying. I'll realise and move that back in shot in a second. Here we go. And then we're doing this top part right here. If you are filling in the shape, there's less pressure to get those lines perfectly thin. So if you're doing a circle like that, you can just drag the brush side to side because you're going to be filling it in anyway and covering any of that up. If you're not filling in the circles, you would want to drag the brush away from the point at all times, and that will keep the line nice and thin. However, as with all freehand, what you want to be doing is using the background colour as well, just to make sure that any areas that you have gone wrong on, you can cover over those and then repaint it again with the initial colour if need be. Made a little bit of a mess of those lines, but as I say, we'll get some white on the go and we will correct where those little errors are. This is a good way to practice if you've got any even bits of paper or anything like that. It's just practice painting the lines and painting circles and painting curves, and that will help get them all into the right place. Got a tiny little bit of white on the brush here. I'm just going to go around the outside and correct any areas where that circle isn't quite right. Move those pieces of lead because they were bugging me rubbing on the underside of my hand. And then we shall realise that we're just off screen and bring that back into shot here. There we go. When you are doing stuff like this and you realise that you've made it too wide or too thin, it doesn't matter, you can always add to it. I always tend to go a little bit wider and then try and shape it with the background colour just to get that right shape that you're after. Sometimes you'll do it and it'll be slightly too wide or too thin, but it is just the practice and keep whittling away at it. Slide that back into shot any second now. Here we go. So we've gone back to the black. We are filling in that circle. That's looking pretty decent so far. May not be perfect, but it's only going to be very, very small, and that's the thing to remember when you're painting stuff for the tabletop. The chances are you're not going to be seeing it close up at all times, so even if you're doing things and you get maybe a slight smudge or it's not 100% circular or the line's slightly off, it doesn't really matter too much, because if it's going to be on a tabletop and gamed with, it's just going to look great that you've actually tried to do that and put the symbol on the side. So filled in that top part there to show you what I was talking about before. It's basically two circles, a line and a crescent. And hopefully it's in shot. All I'm doing here is adding a little bit of paint to smooth off the edge of that circle. And I'll show you what I was talking about before, because if you can get the circle roughly right, then you can paint the circle for the symbol, and then to get it to look like that almost rounded Pac-Man crescent, you can just use a little bit of white paint and take a whole circle out of one side of it, the side that you want it to be, because when you take out that whole circle, it will leave you with the crescent that you're after. So this is one to practice doing the circles and the lines if you want to try any other symbols, or just try painting them on a bit of paper as well. It doesn't have to be on a model. Practice on a bit of paper, practice it on a spare shoulder pad or anything like that. Whatever you've got you can practice on, just try that. because it does make the difference. And then when you come to actually start doing different things on models, you've got the basic parts down to a T. Obviously the basics being that circle and straight line. You will make mistakes on it, as you can tell when I'm going through these and doing the videos of the chapter badge as well. You'll see mistakes on those all the time. It's just a case of getting a tiny bit of paint on your brush each time you make a mistake and just tweaking it a little tiny bit. So if you make a big smudge, then you take a tiny piece off it and then another tiny piece and just work that away. That is where I'm going to leave it for now. So I hope you found that useful, and if you have a practice at that, the next time we'll come back with something a little bit different and you start practicing that too. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, you can head to our Ko-fi or Patreon pages, which are both linked below. Thanks very much.